Hey guys, this is Jensen. I want to kind of talk to you about what went on today. Today we went out fishing. We're in North Florida and we're faced with some conditions that are not quite what you see in Florida. It was in the 20s this morning. Really cold air. Dropped the water temperature about 9 degrees overnight. So these Florida bass don't like cold water. So going into today, I was like, well, we got to go find the deepest holes. We've got to find the deep water that's the closest to the bank, and we've got to fish slow. Well, throughout the day, we were trying to figure them out, trying to figure out, we were dragging worms, we were getting bit, but we couldn't get a fish on, almost like they were picking up the tail. And I kept in the back of my head, I was like, man, I got to tie on a drop shot. I can't believe I've got to fish a drop shot in Florida in January. And so I finally tied one on. And so I want to kind of show you guys how I do this, how I tie on a drop shot worm. Right here I'm using the no twist drop shot hook from Mustad. It's got this really neat little, it's got a swivel on it, really neat little swivel system. And the problem with a drop shot is the more you fish it, the more line twist you get, because the worm just causes all kinds of messy, on the fall and the lift, causes it to twist. First of all, let's talk about how to rig it. The kind of stuff I rig it on is a medium light action spinning rod. This is a 6'8", I think. Let me check, 6'7" This is a 6'7" drop shot rod. I like a short drop shot rod for fishing underneath my boat and fishing a little bit deeper. I've always had better luck getting a fish to the boat. It's a medium light action. I've got 15-pound braid as a main line with a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. I'll even use as little as 8 or 6 pound test, depending on how finicky I think the bass are. Now for line, I like to use a braided main line. This is 15-pound test to a fluorocarbon leader tied with an FG knot. I made a video a long time ago on my YouTube channel about how to tie the FG knot, and it's probably one of the best fluoro to braided mainline knots that I've ever used. The drawback to this hook, or to this style of hook, is that you've got to tie an extra knot. But by doing that, you save yourself a whole lot of heartache in the long run, especially if you're fishing this thing all day long. So the first thing I do is you got to make sure that the hook is turned up when you tie it to the main line, and you tie your main line to the tiny little swivel that's right there, okay? The knot all depends. You can tie an improved clinch or an Albright, or not Albright. You can tie an improved clinch or a Palomar knot. And I prefer to tie an improved clinch. Few wraps around, tuck it through the little hole next to the swivel, back through the loop, pull it tight. Okay, there's your first knot. Your second knot is your tag end. Today, because the bass were lethargic, they were cold, and I know that any largemouth or Florida strain bass, when they get cold and get funky in a funk like that, they like to go sit close to the bottom. So I didn't really want a long tag end for my weight to go onto. So I was fishing a really short tag end, a really short leader, if you want to call it that. So I tie it onto the next little loop. All right, so I tie the tag end, a short little tag end, onto the other loop that's on the lower end of the hook, just like that. And then I have a tag end that's here, is probably about 10 and a half, 11 inches long. And I'm not going to use that whole tag end, but I'm going to leave it there just in case I want to make that adjustment to a longer tag end. This is a drop shot sinker. And what I do is, it's got this little swivel at the top, little oddball swivel, that you just put the line through this loop, double your line up, and just pull it. And it grips your line. And so you don't have to tie any knots to it. It's real quick and easy. This is what gets hung up if you're fishing rocks. And you just break it off and hook another one on, and you can fish 3 or 4 of them without having to retie that little leader. But that's your finished rig. Now, the worm I was using was just like it's a midnight biospawn plasma tail, or black light, I think is the color. The trick is a lot of times this thing gets hung up a lot in the brush. Now our lake the lake we fished today didn't have a lot of brush, but I still rig it the same way. I take the the tip of the hook and I stick it just a little bit beyond the tip of the worm, and then I just pull it until the tip is right there. The tip of the hook is coming out of the tip of the worm, and that's it. That's how I rig it. The reason I do that is it makes it pretty weedless. It doesn't get hung up in a whole lot of places. So there's the finished product. That's what we were catching them on today. All right, so now real quick, I want to tell you how we were fishing this. Remember, the fish are lethargic. So what they do is they're just sitting on the bottom, and they'll eat whatever comes by them within a short distance. So you've got to cover a lot of water very slowly. Kind of makes you want to, jump off the boat and swim back home because it just gets so boring. But when you find them, they're usually in big groups, and then you can start catching them, but you still got to remember to fish slowly. So we were throwing it up into about 5 feet of water, and we found that we were getting bit between 10 and 15 feet of water. So we were throwing up into 5, slowly bringing it down and dragging it down the steeper banks, the harder bottom, the sandy bottom that was getting sun and getting warmed up a little bit more. Bringing it down, and you'd get to 10 or 15 feet, you'd feel that bite. And the key to a drop shot rig, a lot of people, especially those who've been bass fishing for a while, they want to set the hook on the fish. With a drop shot, these little hooks right here are so thin. It's a thin wire hook, and it's an open hook, believe it or not. That hook will come out of that worm really, really easy. All you have to do is just lift up. You feel the bite. I usually count 1 or 2 seconds, and I just lift up on the rod without jerking it, and then reel into the fish and get the rod, the bend in the rod will actually set the hook into that fish, and you'll get more to the boat. Another thing that you'll notice that I did today is when I was fighting the fish, I tried to land the fish out into the water. You get those small bass on there, and you get them up out of the water, and they're flailing around, and they're just tying knots in this rig. It comes back with knots tied around the worm, and it takes you 2, 3, 4 minutes to get it untangled to get your next cast in. And to make it where you can get the most casts in, try to land your fish over in the water, over the edge of the boat. That's the biggest thing. Now, one of the little tricks that I use to find these fish is as we were fishing, I was keeping an eye and looking around, and I saw these gators laying up on the bank out of the wind with their bellies a little bit in the water. A couple of them had their bellies in the water. And I said, you know what? If those alligators there, because they're cold-blooded, if they're there, the bass aren't going to be far behind, because that's probably the warmest spot on that little section of the lake we were in. So we went over there and started dragging around, and literally within the first few casts, boom, I felt that little bump, set the hook, and fought that fish to the boat. So pay attention to what's going on around you, especially with the creatures. The birds are feeding on the bank, the bird flying in the sky and coming down and feeding. Alligators are over there getting warm. Just pay attention and use those as clues as being able to find the fish that are in the area that you're fishing.